Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Directions in Public Gardens speaker series. As we get started tonight, I want to take a moment to reflect on the land on which we live and work in the Seattle area. We acknowledge and honor the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. UW Botanic Gardens is your host this evening. Our mission is sustaining managed and natural ecosystems and the human spirit through plant research, education, and display. Our gardens include the Washington Park Arboretum and the Center for Urban Horticulture in Seattle, Washington, including the Union Bay Natural Area, Elizabeth C. Miller Library, and the UW Student Farm. And we offer education and conservation programs that serve our entire region. And this is the fourth session in our 2022 speaker series called New Directions in Public Gardens. And this is a series of conversations exploring how gardens like ours can evolve to meet community needs today and in the future. We see the colonial history of plant collections and the implicit and explicit exclusion of BIPOC communities from green spaces like public gardens as injustices that shape our past and present and must be countered as we move into the future. We're excited to dig into these conversations to learn more about community-led efforts in our region. We're going to have a few words of introduction. We'll hear a presentation from our guest speaker about the work that they're involved with, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion at the end. So tonight's session will focus on Seattle Parks and Recreation's Urban Food Systems Program, a series of activities that are relevant and timely for every community in Seattle. Access to healthy food, engagement with equitable and sustainable environmental practices, opportunities for active recreation, and cultural placemaking. This conversation will explore some background and history of gardens and agriculture and discuss opportunities for the role of public land in supporting urban food systems and consider how to effectively engage with BIPOC communities. I want to express gratitude to our partners at the Arboretum Foundation for their support in the development of this series. My name is Jessica Farmer. My pronouns are she, her, and I supervise the adult education programs and communications at UW Botanic Gardens. We've got some community agreements here for our series. We ask you to find comfort in discomfort through these conversations. It's normal to feel discomfort while exploring racial and social inequity. While learning and discussion may not get any easier, your ability to engage in more meaningful conversations will expand. So be courageous and courteous and stay engaged. The journey is worth the effort. Practice mindful listening. Try to avoid planning what you're going to say as you listen to others. Just listen with your whole self. And expect and accept non-closure. There's no quick fix. The more we discuss, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more appropriate and promising our actions and interventions will be. I apologize, I realize I skipped over a bit of the Zoom instruction here. So we will be keeping the audience members' microphones and cameras off, but we'll use the Zoom tools for discussion. So we've enabled auto transcription for closed captioning. You can click on the CC tool at the bottom of your screen and choose to show or hide the subtitles. You should also see the Q&A and chat tools at the bottom of your screen. We'll be using Q&A for any questions that you have for our speakers. You can submit questions at any time along the way, and we'll have ample time for addressing them at the end. And you can also use that for any questions you have for me if you need any technical assistance. We have the chat open as a place for community conversation, for kudos, and a place for you to record your thoughts. So we just ask that everyone keep it respectful in the chat and choose to use these conversations as an opportunity to move towards healing and creating action. Okay, so class recording will be sent out tomorrow with a link to the recording to everybody who registered to attend. So we are recording this evening, and we'll also be posting that recording on the speaker series website. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the floor to Maylin Plummer from the Idea Center for Public Gardens to share a little bit more about the purpose of this series. And I'm going to take down my screen here. Go ahead, Maylin.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's great to be here again, and it's great to be here with all of you and our wonderful guest, Paris Yates. Welcome. My name is Maylin Plummer. I am the director for the IDEA Center for Public Gardens. This is a partnership between Denver Botanic Gardens and the American Public Gardens Association. I am based here in Denver, Colorado. I had the great privilege of collaborating with UW Botanic Gardens on this series, and just the great joy of being here and joining you all as we continue these really impactful and I think inspiring and empowering conversations. So with that, I want to give everybody just a moment and a space to just kind of take a deep breath and settle in. I'm sure you all have had busy days, lots of things going on. So let's just kind of settle in and be here. This is a really wonderful series. And I just really want to acknowledge UW Botanic Gardens for taking the leadership role in their community and just everywhere for doing this. So in this work, we talk a lot about creating space for safety, conversations, and possibilities. In choosing to be here, I think we have created a space of intention to be here and to continue onward as allies and change agents. So for that, we celebrate you and thank you for being here. So for now, as I said earlier, everything else drift away and just be here and enjoy this conversation. One of the things that I like to do with large groups and group gatherings, whether we can see each other or not, is to take a moment and just be aware that there are many of us here. Be aware of each other and know that we are here with good intentions. We have differences in why we are here, how we learn, our comfort, how we approach change. We are a mosaic of truths, experiences, circumstances, perspectives, opinions, abilities, identities, and ways of understanding. And we each belong to not just one group, but to many. I believe this series creates a space of possibilities and opportunities, seeds that cultivate the world that we want to create. So for the intent of this series, which I think will resonate with all of you, and it certainly does from my perspective at the Idea Center, we seek impact. Greater number of people and organizations prioritizing and activating IDEA work. Enriched learning that deepens awareness, builds knowledge, and gives us language to form authentic connections, and perhaps displace assumptions and biases. More comfort with discomfort, as Jessica was talking about earlier. Participants, as we go through this process, and the more we participate in these types of conversations, the more I think self-aware we become, and we start to take steps to seek out the edges of our learning, but also that comfort. That's a good thing. And ultimately, this helps to shift our discomforts into playful curiosity and the possibility of celebrating our differences and distinctions instead of disparaging them. And connection, a community of shared experiences, stories, conversations that connect us, that ripple beyond the garden gates and activates our intentions. So with that, let's begin and welcome Paris.
Thank you so much, Maylin. And to that point of action, we're going to talk at the end about a workshop, town hall that we're going to have at the end of this series. But without further ado, I'm honored to welcome tonight's speaker, Paris Yates with Seattle Parks and Recreation's Urban Food Systems Program.
Thank you, Jessica and Maylin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paris Yates. I am the manager of Seattle Parks and Recreation's Urban Food Systems Program. I guess let me start. Oops, let me share. All right, so can everyone?
Yeah, it's up.
There we go.
And perfect. All right.
All right. So there I am at work. So my name is Paris Yates. I'll give you a little bit on my background. I started working as a seasonal for King County Parks way back in 1997, which I say is the beginning of my environmental career. And I have worked for a few different municipalities, government landscape management agencies in Washington and in California. Currently, I work for Seattle Parks and Recreations. I've worked for Seattle Parks and Recreation for a little over 9 years, and I have been with the Urban Food Systems, which was formerly known as the Good Food Program, for about 6 years. All right, so with this presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of background in terms of like what is a food system. I'll talk a little bit about City of Seattle and Seattle Parks and Recreation, the bureaucratic institution that I work for. I'll give you a little bit of history of food policy and just sort of food systems in the United States. And then I will unpack the program that I work for, Urban Food Systems Program. So what is a food system? This is a pretty good sort of model that tells you what a food system is, right? So you produce food. If you need to, you process it, you distribute it. There's access points. You consume food. And then it says resource waste recovery, which is basically the management of the waste and the growing or the production medium. And this food system model doesn't matter, you know, where you are on Earth, right? You can be in a city, you can be in a suburb, you can be rural, but basically this is how humans, the human food cycle. So benefits of a healthy food system: promoting health and preventing disease in terms of human health and disease prevention, increasing equity and opportunity for all. Growing food allows you not only to just grow food to feed yourself, but it also has cultural expression in there. Building shared prosperity in a region, protecting and enhancing our environment, and celebrating food, strengthening community. So that's just your basic, what is a food system? A couple of slides are, I'm basically pulling from my master's research. And so you're going to see a problem statement, and you're going to see other things, right? So problem statement: Seattle's urban food system is socially inequitable and environmentally unsustainable. So in that statement, basically, you know, as humans, you know, for most of our existence, we spent a great deal of our time procuring food, right? You hear the hunter-gatherer sort of scenario. And, you know, no matter where you are at on Earth, as a human, procuring food, you know, was basically the number one thing that you did with most of your time, right? We will speed all the way up to about, 150 years ago, United States, when folks were leaving the quote unquote rural environments and coming into the urban environments. Let's see, and basically urban environments. So when you're in a rural environment, you usually have land, you have space to grow food. Urban environments, not so much, right? Urban environments, the exact opposite, right? Densification, small spaces for humans to dwell, right? And not a lot of open spaces, open land. So most people who live in cities I'll say this, all people who live in cities get their food from access points that we call stores, right? There's all kinds of stores, there's markets, there's big stores, little stores, but most people have to buy their food from the store, right? And food in the United States is under the capitalist umbrella, right? It's commoditized. So in the city, you have to go to a store and you have to purchase your food. And with capitalism, and you commoditize food becomes like any other product where the premium products have a premium cost to them, right? So, if you buy a car, if you buy a Toyota, that's one thing. If you buy a Rolls Royce, that's another, right? So food goes through the capitalist lens. Another part of my research was a research question. So my research was based on the job that I'm doing for Seattle Parks and Recreation's Urban Food Systems Program. And basically, I'll read this research question. In what ways can equity policy and sustainability practices impact the accessibility to healthy food for BIPOC communities in Seattle? So basically, what that means is, how can the city of Seattle leverage its equity policies and its landscape assets to provide access to BIPOC folks in Seattle? Let me see. And just to sort of go through the equity policy here, City of Seattle is known for its progressive equity policy. We tout that a lot. And so there's, I always say that, there's warehouses full of policy when it comes to the city of Seattle. The two major policy pieces that affect the urban food systems is the equity and environment agenda and the food action plan. Equity and environment agenda is sort of the broad reaching umbrella policy that basically says, every resident of Seattle has certain rights. And it is the city of Seattle's duty to create and implement systems that create access to our land and to our program. Food action plan is more specific. So the food action plan 1.0 that was published in 2012, and they're about to publish another food action plan 2.0, which I think comes out in 2023. But basically, the food action plan focuses on access and distribution within the city, right? How do, in particular, BIPOC folks access healthy, nutritious food within Seattle? And, how do businesses and organizations, how do they use their systems to distribute food within the city? Let me see. So with that, let's talk a little bit about history. And I am going to read something, and I am over 50, so I'm going to have to take my glasses off to do this. So the background and socio-political context of food policy in the United States. So whether you're in a rural or urban environment, everyone in the United States is affected by food policy. Urban food, well, I should say food policies in particular impact urban residents in ways that I'm basically about to explain. So food policy in America, the history of America's modern food policy is rooted in the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. In 1847, the Temporary Relief Act, AKA the Soup Kitchen Act, was passed by the United Kingdom Parliament. It called for food to be provided through taxes collected from Irish merchants and landowners, right? So in Ireland, right, basically they taxed the rich to feed the poor. The potato famine wasn't just an economic problem, it was an environmental problem. So a lot of Irish immigrants came to the United States, right, to find food. But by 1870, America was experiencing an economic depression, and the Irish Quaker immigrants began to establish soup kitchens to feed the hungry masses in America, right? So you leave Ireland to find food, come to America, and you basically kind of are finding the same thing. Not necessarily the environmental issues with growing food, like the Dust Bowl, come later on in the 1900s. But for now, this is where we're at. So speed forward about 30 years, in the late 1920s, Republican President Herbert Hoover subscribed to the notion of quote unquote rugged individualism and believed pulling yourself up by your bootstraps was the solution to America's rapidly growing national food insecurity. So it was roaring 20s. Basically, the president at the time and the government was like, you know, if you're hungry, it's because you're not working hard enough, right? You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This is the land of opportunity. However, even back then, folks were realizing that there were systemic issues that were driving food crises. So anyway, before the Great Depression of 1930, America had little to no programs that provided a socially economic safety net. So we talk about safety nets, you know, government programs, folks call them entitlement programs, did not exist in the United States before 1930. Well, actually before 1932. Soup kitchens were, so we have no government services. We do have soup kitchens, right? Particularly through religious organizations, which still happens today. But the Catholic Church was a big driver of soup kitchens 100 years ago. Soup kitchens were operated by charitable organizations such as churches, religious groups, missions, ladies' aid societies, women's leagues, and the Salvation Army. These charities relied on funding from local businesses and private individuals. However, in 1932, Herbert Hoover reluctantly allocated $4 million in federal funds to cities to support and expand the soup kitchen national food system. Public land was allocated to grow food for soup kitchens, and residential landowners were encouraged to create soup gardens to grow and donate food to their local soup kitchens. It still wasn't enough. FDR came in and promised a New Deal. Folks voted Hoover out of office. And in Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal to America in 1933 with a promise of relief, reform, and recovery from the Great Depression. The New Deal was comprised of a series of federally funded social programs designed to bring aid to American citizens, most notably the Social Security Act. Food systems relief was included in the New Deal, and in October 1933, the Federal Surplus Relief Corporation was established to divert agricultural commodities to charitable organizations. Federal food systems were created to distribute flour, pork, apples, beans, and canned beef to local food kitchens throughout the nation. And that is, the New Deal is the bedrock, basically, of social services in the United States. So let's see, from FDR in the 30 years later, LBJ implemented the Great Society, which also had food policy in it targeted at children. The breakfast programs in the United States were started on LBJ Great Society policy, food stamps. With the New Deal came along the first sort of food stamp program, which now has evolved into EBT, and then food banks. Let me read a little bit more about the food banks. By the late 1960s, the economic expansion America enjoyed started to contract, which gave way to the creation of what we know today as food banks. Neighbors in Need, quote unquote, was Seattle's first known emergency food program. It was established in 1967 by ecumen. I'm not saying it right, but basically religious programs. In 1970, the Seattle Times announced the creation of a new organization designed as a quote unquote food bank to address food insecurity triggered by the Boeing bust. I don't know how many Seattleites are out there who remember the Boeing bust, and the overall national decline of middle-class employment. The hope was the economy would recover and the food bank would only need to operate for about 12 months. That was in 1970. So with all that being said, one last thing, let's talk about the bureaucracy that I work for. So Seattle Parks and Recreation is a division in the city of Seattle, right? City of Seattle is a big municipality, lots of divisions. It runs, one of the 10 major cities in the United States, Seattle. And so there's that. Let me see. So this is the org chart that I'm in. Let's see, within City of Seattle, there's Seattle Parks and Recreation. Within Seattle Parks and Recreation, I think there's 8 divisions. The division that the urban food systems in is the Parks Division. We call it the Parks and Environment Division, the acronym PED. So the urban food systems is in the PED division. Within that division, the urban food systems in this org chart is in the natural resources unit. Within that unit, there is the urban forestry division. Within there is the tree crew, and then down, you can see in the green is the urban food systems program, where it says I am the senior gardener. So this is the latest org chart, 5/25/2022, so 3 months ago. And already a lot of this information is outdated. Like the food system is no longer here in the org chart, it's over in finance. My title has changed. So I just kind of wanted to show you where the food system lives in terms of its bureaucracy. I'm going to start unpacking the next slides. I'm going to start unpacking the food system, but before that, I just wanted to let you know or let you see the part that most folks don't see, the inside part. The other last thing about this is where the urban food systems programs lives in Seattle Parks and Recreation. So there's the Parks Division, there's the Recreation Division. They're kind of siloed. Most people on the outside would probably be surprised how little the Parks Division and the Recreation Division communicate, and just the line. They're two totally different lines of business. The urban food system has lines of business in both divisions. So there's been this back and forth of where does the urban food systems lie, right? The Parks Division is landscape management, recreation is programming, and the systems are set up so that the two don't meet. So UFS has to straddle the institutional bureaucratic issues within Seattle Parks and Recreation. So what is the Urban Food Systems Program? And these pictures are kind of snapshots of what we do, right? So like I mentioned, there's programming aspects and intergenerational programming, lots of diversity in terms of culture, race, religion. We deal with everyone. We also maintain land, right? I have a staff who maintains Seattle Parks and Recreation's landscape assets. I'll talk about that later. And then, like I said, there's a programming. What you see, the picture here was the community kitchen program that we did down at South Park with participants of the community center, folks who were in the community center. Other programs, we would hold a dinner and they would bring their parents and their family. So like I said, the food systems spans a lot of different programs, right? So if you work for a government agency, you have to have outcomes and strategies, and you have to make them clear and explicit. So, your boilerplate outcomes: encourage healthy and active lifestyles, steward parkland for long-term sustainability, support the local food system, how we get their strategies, like I said, community engagement, leveraging our assets, harvesting, cooking, like I said. So these outcomes and strategies, even though they are specific to the urban food system, because of the bureaucracy, they have to align and, as we call, roll up into the higher level overall strategic plan, right? So little pieces of what you see here basically intersects with everyone's outcomes and strategies within within our division, within our department, and within the city of Seattle. All right. Urban food systems assets. So there's land, so the Seattle Parks and Recreation manages roughly 11% of all of the land in the city of Seattle limits, right? So 11% of every square foot that makes up the city of Seattle, Seattle Parks and Recreation manages, right? And there's all kinds of different landscapes, right? There's parks, you know, your traditional park with a lawn and a play area, sports field, your built environment parks. There's natural areas. We have big swaths of land, natural areas east and west of Wamish, Greenbelt being one of them. And we have gardens, orchards, and urban farms along with those assets. The Urban Food Systems Program, we manage community gardens, public orchards, right, that are located on Seattle Parks and Recreation land. Right now, we have about 13 public gardens that are located primarily close to SPR community centers. Community centers are sort of strategically placed. They're usually next to a school or some playgrounds are usual playgrounds. Community centers are usually located next to very accessible public areas. And they're also usually located next to other municipal facilities. So 10 years ago, when the food system, when UFS was started, a lot of the community gardens were developed next to community centers. We're kind of expanding that now due to public demand. So there's that. Public orchards. Right now, there's close to 800 fruit trees in our fruit tree collection. We have about 20 public orchard sites, and those sites, some of them consist of maybe 5 or 6 fruit trees. Other have 80 fruit trees. You know, there are traditional orchards, right? And then, you know, there are fruit trees that are on our land and that we have decided to take care of. At this point, there's probably thousands more fruit trees that I haven't recognized, but the program only has a certain capacity to take care of the fruit trees that we've quote unquote recognized. So there's gardens, orchards, there's urban farms. SPR has 2 urban farms located on its property. One is Mara Farm, which is down at South Park. Parts of that property, particularly the pea patch part of Mara Farm, is managed by the Department of Neighborhoods. Let me see. The other urban farm is in Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetland, down in the Rainier Beach area, and that is managed by Tilt Alliance. Tilt Alliance has managed that property for almost 20 years, I think. So the Urban Food Systems Program, we take care of fruit trees down at Mara Farm. But other than that, we don't really manage anything there. And down at Rainier Beach Urban Farm, we do some programming down there. We don't manage any of the land, but we do cider press events in the fall. So we have a relationship with TILF. So how do we take care of well, basically what are our maintenance policies? Our big maintenance policy is our tree care policy, which we have named it the UFS Total Tree Care. We call it framework. Technically, I can't call it policy because it's not technically a policy. It's not been written down and approved by a lot of folks, but it is the policy that I implement for the program. And basically it is a seasonal tree, your basic tree care policy that is tailored for fruit trees, right? So in the winter you prune, in the spring you do a lot of mulching around the trees. Summer, we do some irrigation and some weeding around the fruit trees. Of course, the summertime you harvest, which is, we're in the middle of the harvest season right now. It's a big time for us. And then the fall, we do composting. Basically, we spread compost around the trees under the drip line for sanitary reasons and to help with our pest management. This is how we keep track of all of our data. Seattle Parks and Recreation, we have our own IT department. We utilize ArcGIS mapping software, but we have GIS analysts that help us create and manage these dashboards. These dashboards were internal for the first 2 years. They have just gone public. So this is a public-facing dashboard that has our garden and orchard information, right? It shows you how many gardens. It shows you how much fruit was, or how much food was collected at the gardens. It shows the locations of the gardens. Same with the fruit tree inventory, right? It says 720, but I've added some fruit trees in the last couple of months. Same thing, tells you the pounds of fruit, where the orchards are located, and then it breaks down the data by site, right? At this site, we collected X amount, right? So this is a hard, I'm basically responsible for entering all of this data. So that is kind of daunting. However, this is a great tool for me to tell UFS's story internally and externally. So yeah, like I said before, we talked a little bit about equity policy. Like I said, these are the two policies that UFS focuses on. If you are an employee of the city of Seattle and you manage a program, it's required that you have equity measurements in your annual work plan. So for me, I relish that. Other folks within the organization, it's their job. So they meet it differently. But UFS has, yeah, it's equity is I don't want to say it's a no-brainer for us. I for sure wouldn't say that it's easy. but it's necessary, and we're committed to it. Let's see, a little bit more about equity policy. I'll talk a little bit about volunteers. So inside the city of Seattle, I should say within the Parks Department, we have we have a saying, right? So there's north of Yesler Way and there's south of Yesler Way. If you are a Seattle resident or you're familiar with Seattle, in the middle of Seattle, Yesler Way, the street Yesler Way runs from, what is it, east to west. And above, right north of Yesler Way is the demographics are primarily white, primarily middle class, middle to upper class. And there are reasons behind that, right? The Seattle's covenants, right? 100 years ago, if you were white, you went north of Yesler. If you weren't white, you went south of Yesler. And even though some of those covenants are still on the books, and we're 100 years later, we still see the legacy of that, right? A lot of BIPOC folks, a lot of BIPOC community in the South End, although we're being gentrified, right? So like the bigger scope in Seattle is like there's not going, 10 years from now, there's just not going to be a lot of BIPOC folks who are, or I should say, there's not going to be as many BIPOC folks living in Seattle as there is today. That's another story. In terms of volunteers and who I deal with, the volunteers north of Yesler Way primarily view food system activities, growing food, utilizing our properties as a form of recreation, right? The traditional parks, get outside, get your hands dirty, they're passionate about horticulture, but it stays within the recreation wheelhouse. South of Yesler Way, more, how do I say, more food justice minded, right? Not just about recreation, but growing food to feed community as a cultural expression, and as a political expression. So anyway, I'll go on. I'll talk more about equity, right? So equity and equality, right? So what's the difference between equity and equality? I like this. I like this picture because for a long time, equality was where society was going for, right? But then you ended up with situations like separate but equal, right? Giving everyone the same amount doesn't work because we're not all in the same place, right? Which speaks to equity. So how that plays out in terms of how I serve my volunteers, well, I'll give you a few different scenarios. So, and I'm being super general, I'm painting with a big brush. So there are details in this. However, folks north of Yesler Way primarily just need what I call my permission, right? They have resources, they have time, they're committed to it. So basically what they need from me is, hey, can I do this? Can I do that? If there's some sort of infrastructure problem, the water doesn't work, but that's basically how I'm serving them, right? They produce a lot of food. So there's that. South, a lot of folks that I work with on the South end are BIPOC folks, and a lot of those folks just really need food, right? Do they have all of the material resources that the folks up north have? No. Do they have all of the time to come out and work in the garden and keep it looking fabulous? No. That's where I come in. That's where my staff comes in. So some gardens, particularly the ones in the South End, me and my staff, we operate those gardens, right? Folks come in, they do their programming. We give, they distribute the food, right? A lot of the folks on the South End, I sort of am counting on them to help distribute the food more so than grow the food, and to use the food in cultural expression, so on and so forth. How am I doing on time? Let me see. Which leads me to food banks, right? Seattle has a great food bank network, right? A lot of food banks support each other. About 70% of all of the food that is grown and harvested from UFS sites go directly to food banks. These are some of the food banks that I work with. Rainier Valley Food Bank was my heart. I don't know what happened to it, but but it was right down in the South End. I heard that they moved. But when you deliver food to the food bank, you start to develop relationships with folks who work there, and you see how the food that is produced directly impacts folks. And I would like to move the program beyond food banks, right? And this is the reason why. So food insecurity, this is basically the food insecurity roadmap, right? Food insecurity, you start at emergency food assistance, which is food banks, right? So yes, we donate a lot of food at the food, in the food banks, but in terms of bringing the program down to where food security is, food banks are the first stop. We're kind of in the middle, right? We produce food on a pretty big scale. We garden, we do programming, and I'm working to get the program more down into the youth education mentor promoter. I'm trying to get it more down in there, right? Just to bring the program to where I think it could be. So there, one more slide. And our last slide before we get into the discussion, I will talk about the program, right? So my background personally is in landscape management. So developing the urban food systems programs, landscape management side has, I don't want to say it's been easy, but it's definitely in my zone. Now that I'm at a point where I'm getting funding, I have staff, I'm trying to shift my focus more on the programming aspect and the human aspect, and how to develop systems that impact, well, I should say that I can sort of evaluate and measure the impacts, So a lot of the programming that we've done in the past are cider press events. Washington State produces a lot of apples. We produce a whole lot of apples, and cider, turning it into cider, it's a practical sort of thing, right? In terms of producing, in terms of turning apples into a product that folks can use. A lot of our apples don't look good. They're not the apples you see at the store, but cider pressing sort of usurps that. So we do a lot of cider press events with all kinds of folks. We do, like I said, community kitchen programs. Sometimes we hire chefs to help us with that. We do a lot of youth programming with high schools, with human services division. What else? We also make products. So we used to make a lot of jellies and jams, but because of the bureaucracy, how to distribute those products, right? Because this food is grown on public land, I can't sell it to folks. I can't make a profit off of it. So basically, I've had to give it away, and we don't have time to talk about this, but free food and giving food away, a lot of folks can't wrap their heads around that. We're capital. It's funny, when I used to do programming with children, the first thing they would say is, why don't you give the food away? Why don't we give food away? And for a long time, well, I should say my knee-jerk reaction was like, child, we don't give food away. You have to sell it. But then as I thought about it, why don't we give food away? Right? So I've been working on that. A lot of folks within my institution, like I said, have a hard time with that, but I am working on that. So this is my last slide. I don't know, Jessica, should I keep sharing, or
let's
should I
go
stop
ahead
sharing?
and stop sharing.
Okay.
And we'll bring Maylin back to the screen too.
There
Thank
we
you
go.
so much, Paris. It's such an incredible program, and it's so exciting to hear how it's growing and
Yes.
growing big time. And that's really amazing. I want to let everybody know that we're probably going to go about 10 minutes or so over, because I want us to have a little bit of time for discussion here. And but it's so great to learn everything that's going on. We've got a few questions who've come in from the audience. Feel free, folks, to put in more. Maylin, is there anything you want to start with in terms of questions, or shall I jump into the audience Q&A?
I say gave it over to the audience, let them
All right,
speak. Yeah.
great. So Paris, we got a question here from Kate asking, you started out by showing us a circular food system diagram. What are some ways the city of Seattle can help support a local circular food system? Like, where do you see gaps?
Well, I mean, it depends on what type of food system that you're supporting, right? So the stores, right, the corporate food systems, they kind of see us as competition, right?
Mhm.
So like, are you going to see some of the food that I grow in stores? No. Kind of the same with, oddly, with the government, right? So for a while, we were thinking about how do we introduce this fresh food into the school systems, right? And lunches at community centers. And basically, we ran up against the entitlement programs that I talked about earlier, right? So basically the government was like, we subsidize these certain programs and we supply the food for them, right?
Right.
So if somebody else comes in, then that's going to mess up our whole system, right? So, like I said, unfortunately, the easiest and sort of quick impact are food banks. There's that. Impacting, folks' personal or cultural, like I said, that's something that I'm working on, and that is going to take time.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
But I think too, like you talked about those subsidy programs, and we talked in one of our planning calls about how you can't produce food like on public land really close to, you talk about competition, like the grocery store, big grocery store, right? You can't have a community garden right next to it because it's competition. So maybe like identifying those places where policy shifts could create opportunity for that local food system. Finding those places where there's barriers that are built into the subsidies, or what have you.
Yeah, and government policies, are influenced by public, right? So, for instance, how do I say? So believe it or not everyone is excited about this program, right? There are a few powerful friends of groups who will remain nameless, who are like, we don't grow food in our parks, right? We subscribe to the Teddy Roosevelt sort of pristine, untouched landscapes, right? And you're the parks department, right? You guys, bats, balls, tennis courts, right? So like tradition is, plays a part, right? So like, yeah, when it's funny when I have an idea and I say, hey, I'm gonna, go in this direction, or hey, I think this is a great place for a garden or an orchard, because we're a bureaucracy, we have to go through the stakeholder process, which means everybody that we can think of that is going to be impacted at this location, we have to engage them, right? And that is, that's when I quote unquote get my feelings hurt, right? Because I get the feedback and I'm like, what do you mean you don't want, to grow food, healthy, nutritious food? So I don't know if that answers your question, or not, but like I said, some things are real easy to do and some things are not real easy to do.
Well, and it gets at some of the areas of challenge, which is, I guess, what you'd want to address first. So we got another question here in the Q&A from Annalisa asking, have you been able to determine if any of the workers or kids that you're engaging in this work, if they're going to be groomed to take over your position or position like yours one day? And Annalisa says, we currently have aging leaders in our own program and it's hard to find committed people to take over.
Yeah, so that is a great question. So like, what is my line of succession, right? So my light is going out, but
Getting
you
dark
can
out
see,
there.
yeah, you can see it. I'm Black, right? I'm an African American man in an industry that doesn't have a lot of folks who look like me, right? Particularly in management positions like me, right? So I'm sort of, and I'm not afraid to say I'm in my 50s, right? So I'm not retiring anytime soon, but I'm looking at my line of succession, right? Like, who is going to backfill me, and how I'm sort of cultivating that, right. So there are folks, some of my seasonal folks that I work with, right? A few of them African American males, right? Who are like, hey, I want your job. And I'm like, okay, I want you to have my job. And, you got to have certain things to have my job,
Mhm.
right? You have to have an education, you have to have experience. Like, it took me a while to get here.
Mhm.
So, I'm I'm building capacity, right? So like some of the folks, a few of my staff, right? Like, get into school, right? You work for the city of Seattle, they will accommodate it, right? So you need your education, um, you need support, right? Particularly if I'm bringing in BIPOC folks into this industry, it gets rough,
Mhm.
right? Microaggressions, everyone is, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone, right? Black, white, and in between. It's like, looking at you like, what are you doing here? like,
Mm.
and not necessarily in a mean way, even though you get plenty of that, but just like a lot of folks are just surprised,
Yeah.
right? Like, what do you, so, and all of that, has its impacts on you psychologically. So it's like, who's going to come in behind me? I don't know, but like the folks that I see, I'm preparing them, like in terms of on paper, their resume and psychologically, right? The other thing that I do too is I uh, I take a lot of my staff with me to certain meetings. I don't know if
Mhm.
certain folks, particularly managers, appreciate appreciate me bringing in my staff into certain meetings, but like I believe, I have a purview that a lot of folks will never be able to understand or appreciate unless they're right there with me to
Yeah.
see it. So
Mhm.
so I am very much a person of, bring your mentee with you, right? Bring them to that meeting. Um, expose them to that. And, some people might feel a little uncomfortable. Why do they have a mentee there? But like, expose
Mhm.
folks to what you do.
Yeah. I remember you brought a couple folks to some meetings that we were in years ago. Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
You
You
were
know.
really cool about it. Thank you.
Well, yes. It was great. We should do that more. Um, so another question that's come in here, here we're wanting to think about ways that gardens and other organizations can work in this same space to support each other and reach mutual outcomes. And question is whether your orchard program overlaps with City Fruit. And so that's a local organization that, for those who don't know, that harvests fruit from trees, I think primarily on privately owned land to give to food banks. Um, so do you interact with them at all?
Yeah, so City Fruit was a city of Seattle contractor. So for years they got money from the city council, and then or the urban food systems uh, administered that contract. And when COVID hit, that funding stopped.
Mm.
Um, and City Fruit also, like you said, City Fruit was kind of having capacity issues in terms of maintaining and harvesting on public land. They have a really robust private um, harvesting program. So it just kind of, it just became kind of clear to everyone that that contract wasn't really
Mm.
working out. We still do some programming contracts. So
Mm.
Cities Fruit still has programming events on our land, and we basically pay them for each program, but it's not the big, it's not the relationship that we've had in the past.
Okay. Malin, did you have anything you wanted to contribute? I haven't been able to toss many questions your way in this conversation so far.
No, I think that the floor belongs to Paris here and with folks who have questions for him in the community, because I think that there's some really great questions here. So I kind of feel like I have a lot of thoughts, and I just think that this has been really enlightening, because you've really kind of opened up. For me, we talk about the system, right, a lot, and how ingrained some of that systemic hierarchy and how history and legacies have played into that. And so, yeah, it's just really fascinating just to kind of see how you're working within that system. So, and I think the questions are really opening that up. So I'm just kind of step back there, but yeah.
Well, there are some more good questions. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time though, and also the daylight where Paris is. Can you still hear us, Paris? I see.
I just
we've lost
turned
your
off
video.
my I just turned off my
All right.
camera because you're not going to see. And my battery will probably run out soon. So maybe two more questions. I see one question.
So we've got a question here from Allison. It's a big one. What's the hardest part of running a program like this, and what was the biggest hurdle when you started this type of program?
Well, the biggest hurdle for me was funding, right? And then I see also in Perry, was it Perry Ackworth? This kind of answers your question too. My wish list. So for a long time, the Urban Food Systems program didn't have funding within, right? We had no money, we had no staff. I mean, we had 2 staff people, but basically I just used other people's resources within the department to run this program, right? So I used everybody else's trucks, I spent everybody else's money. I used their staff, right? So, but like it was kind of a phantom program within, right? Now, so 2 things. One is the Metropolitan Parks District. I don't know how many of you all have heard of that, but it's the way that the Parks Department, it's a major funding source for the Parks Department. Basically, Parks Department gets tax dollars to fund our programs, and certain programs are in that pool, right? So last month, Urban Food Systems jumped into that pool, right? So I will be getting, what is it? 600-700 grand or something like. Basically, I'm going to be getting more staff and an operating budget, which is great. The other major funding, so yeah, to answer that question, the hardest part was I was running on fumes. I had no money, had no resources. And even though I was in this big bureaucracy, so wish list, the other sort of big funding is what we call CIP money, which is capital improvement projects. So big funding projects, right? So when you see those signs that say, hey, we're going to redo this park, or we're going to redo this playfield, that money comes from CIP fund, capital improvement funds, which is millions of dollars. So right now I am working with our planning and development department to set up the Urban Food Systems capital improvement funding. So basically, I've identified garden and potential urban farm sites, and hopefully, they'll get some money, right? But going through that CIP filter, hopefully in the next coming years, there will be bigger and better food systems, gardens, and orchards, and maybe other landscape features
Mhm.
within that, right? So there's garden, there's orchards, and then there's espalier gardens and
Yeah.
demonstration gardens and all of that. So I don't want to say my dreams are coming true, but my bills are about to get paid, which is
Yeah.
great.
Moving in the right direction for sure. So I think the questions keep coming in. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it at this point, but some of the questions coming in are a great segue. I'm going to share my screen as we close out here. So asking about potential partnerships, asking about, who might you consider Master Gardener Foundation or gardens like ours in working with to help bolster that youth programming that you're interested in focusing on. I think that there's a lot of room for conversations to continue about how programs like ours can potentially work together, right? And find ways that we're identifying our common goals and working as we move forward. So I want to remind everybody I'm going to send an email out when this is done or tomorrow with a link to the recording if you missed anything. Our next conversation is on September 20th. It's the last evening conversation in this series, and it was with Sean Watts talking about the community of color-led land conservancy that's operating in Seattle now. And then we're going to have a town hall the following day to really explore these ideas in terms of what came up during the conversation, what are the greatest needs in our community, and how can we co-create action plans to move this forward. Maylin is going to come here from Denver to be a part of that. We hope to have many of our speakers there and many of you from the audience. So I will also include in your follow-up email a link to the registration for that if you'd like to join us for that day of conversation. So, we really appreciate each and every one of you for sharing your time with us tonight, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much, Paris and Maylin, for joining us.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you,
Yep.
everyone.
Thank you. Yep.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.